and 3 experienced lighthouse keepers vanished without a trace. No bodies, no witnesses, no signs of escape. And when the rescue crew finally stepped onto the isolated island where they had been stationed, they found something that still sends chills down the spine of investigators. More than a century later, a half-eaten meal sat abandoned on the table. A chair was mysteriously knocked over. The clock had stopped, and the men themselves were simply gone. Imagine being trapped on a tiny island in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean. Endless black water surrounds you in every direction. Violent waves crash against razor-sharp cliffs hundreds of feet below. No neighbors, no towns, no way off the island unless a ship arrives. Now imagine that one day, every person living there disappears, completely, without leaving a single explanation. Tonight, we're diving into one of the greatest unsolved disappearances in history. A mystery so strange that even after more than 100 years, nobody can say for certain what happened. This is the terrifying mystery of the Flannan Isles. And before we begin, welcome to Midnight Archive. If you're fascinated by unsolved mysteries, chilling disappearances, dark historical events, and stories that refuse to give up their secrets, make sure you subscribe and join us for more journeys into the unknown. Now turn down the lights. Get comfortable. And let's travel to one of the loneliest places on Earth. Far off the rugged coast of Scotland lies a small group of rocky islands known as the Flannan Isles. Even today, these islands feel isolated from the rest of the world. But in the year 1900, they were practically cut off from civilization entirely. The islands were little more than jagged rocks rising from the Atlantic Ocean. There were no permanent communities, no shops, no roads, no comfort, only powerful winds, freezing rain, and the endless roar of the sea. Yet despite the dangers, one important structure stood on the largest island. A lighthouse. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse had been built to guide ships safely through some of the most treacherous waters in the region. Every night, its powerful light warned sailors of deadly cliffs and hidden rocks. Without it, countless vessels risked disaster. Keeping that light operating was a serious responsibility. And that responsibility belonged to 3 lighthouse keepers. The men assigned to the island in December of 1900 were James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur. Each man had experience working in dangerous and isolated environments. James Ducat served as the principal keeper. He was known as reliable, disciplined, and highly respected. Thomas Marshall was the second assistant keeper. He had years of experience and understood the unforgiving nature of the sea. Donald MacArthur was serving as a temporary replacement. Unlike the others, MacArthur had a reputation for being tough, emotional, and sometimes hot-tempered. Yet despite their differences, the 3 men shared a common reality. For weeks at a time, they would live together on a remote island with virtually no contact from the outside world. It was a lonely existence. Their daily routine rarely changed. They maintained the lighthouse, recorded weather conditions, monitored equipment, cleaned facilities, and waited for the occasional supply ship. Life on the island could become repetitive, but it could also become terrifying. Winter storms frequently slammed into the Flannan Isles with enormous force. Massive waves exploded against the cliffs. Hurricane-strength winds howled through the darkness. Many sailors feared these waters. Even experienced seamen treated the area with caution. But lighthouse keepers were expected to endure whatever nature threw at them. It was simply part of the job. As December 1900 progressed, the men carried out their duties as usual. Nothing appeared unusual. Nothing suggested they were about to become part of one of history's greatest mysteries. Then something strange happened. On December 15th, ships passing through the area reported something alarming. The lighthouse light appeared to be out. At first, this may not sound significant, but remember, the lighthouse existed for one purpose. Its light had to remain operational. A dark lighthouse in dangerous waters was a serious problem. Yet, due to severe weather conditions, nobody could immediately investigate. Powerful storms prevented supply vessels from reaching the island. Days passed. The lighthouse remained silent. Meanwhile, nobody on the mainland knew the truth. Something had already gone terribly wrong. Finally, on December 26th, nearly a week after concerns first emerged, a relief vessel called the Hesperus approached the island. On board was Joseph Moore, the replacement lighthouse keeper scheduled to begin his shift. As the ship neared the island, Moore expected to see one of the keepers waiting at the landing platform. That was standard procedure. Whenever a relief ship arrived, someone would usually be there to greet it. But something felt wrong almost immediately. No one appeared. No signal flags. No welcoming figure. Nothing. The island seemed strangely silent. The crew sounded the ship's horn. Again and again, still no response. The men waited. Nothing happened. An uneasy feeling spread among those aboard the vessel. Eventually, Joseph Moore climbed into a small boat and headed toward the island. As he approached the landing area, he felt increasingly uncomfortable. The silence was unnatural. The entire place seemed abandoned. When Moore finally stepped ashore and began walking toward the lighthouse, he noticed the first disturbing detail. The main gate was closed. The grounds appeared deserted. There was no sign of human activity anywhere. He continued toward the living quarters. Then he opened the door. And what he found would launch a mystery that remains unsolved to this day. Inside, the rooms appeared strangely untouched. One set of oilskins was missing. Two sets remained hanging where they should have been. The beds were unmade. A meal appeared to have been interrupted. A chair had been overturned. Most disturbing of all, there was absolutely no sign of the three men. No note, no message, no explanation. James Ducat was gone. Thomas Marshall was gone. Donald MacArthur was gone. The lighthouse keepers had vanished. Every room was searched, every corner inspected. Nothing. It was as if the men had simply stepped out of existence. Joseph Moore immediately began looking for clues. He examined the lighthouse logs. At first, what he discovered only deepened the mystery. The final entries described unusually severe weather. One note suggested powerful winds were battering the island. Another mentioned that one of the men had been crying. An unusual detail considering the keepers were known as experienced and hardened workers. Then there were references suggesting fear. Fear so intense that the men were reportedly praying together. For veteran lighthouse keepers to react that way seemed extraordinary. What could possibly frighten them so badly? And if conditions were truly that dangerous, why had no nearby weather stations recorded major storms at the same time? The questions multiplied, but answers remained impossible to find. Investigators soon arrived and launched a thorough search of the island. The western landing area quickly attracted attention. Evidence suggested significant storm damage had occurred there. Boxes had been smashed. Equipment had been displaced. Iron railings were bent. Heavy objects weighing hundreds of pounds had been moved by tremendous force. Clearly, enormous waves had struck parts of the island, but could that explain the disappearance? Or was something far stranger responsible? As investigators pieced together the timeline, several unsettling possibilities emerged, and each one raised terrifying new questions. The first and most obvious theory seemed simple. The men had been swept away by a massive wave. At first glance, it sounded reasonable. The western landing platform showed clear signs of extreme damage. Ropes had been torn loose. Storage boxes were shattered. Heavy equipment had been displaced. Anyone standing too close to the edge during a violent storm could easily be pulled into the ocean. And if that happened, survival would be nearly impossible. The Atlantic surrounding the Flannan Isles was merciless. Freezing water, violent currents, towering waves. Even strong swimmers would stand no chance. Yet the more investigators examined the evidence, the less convincing the explanation became. According to lighthouse regulations, one keeper was always supposed to remain inside the lighthouse, no matter what happened outside. That rule existed for a reason. The lighthouse light had to remain operational. If two men went outside to secure equipment, the third man should have stayed behind. But if that rule had been followed, why were all three men missing? What could have caused every keeper to leave the safety of the lighthouse at the same time? The mystery deepened further when investigators noticed another strange detail. Two sets of waterproof oilskins remained inside. Only one set appeared to have been taken. Experienced lighthouse keepers never ventured into a winter storm without protective clothing. The weather was simply too dangerous. Yet if only one man wore his oilskins, that suggested at least one of the others had rushed outside unexpectedly. Why? What emergency could have been so urgent that trained professionals abandoned basic safety precautions? No one could answer. As weeks turned into months, theories began spreading across Scotland. Some were reasonable. Others were terrifying. And a few sounded like something from a nightmare. One possibility suggested that a giant rogue wave had struck the island. Even today, rogue waves remain among the most frightening phenomena on Earth. Unlike normal waves, rogue waves can appear suddenly, without warning, rising to incredible heights. Sailors have described walls of water emerging from darkness like moving mountains. If a wave large enough slammed into the western cliffs, investigators reasoned it could potentially sweep several men into the sea instantly. The evidence of storm damage supported this idea, but not everyone was convinced, because another question remained. Why were all three men together? What circumstance brought them to the exact same dangerous location? The wave theory explained how they might have died. It did not explain why they were there, and that distinction mattered. The uncertainty left room for even darker possibilities. Some people believed an accident wasn't responsible at all. Instead, they wondered whether conflict had erupted among the isolated men. Life inside a remote lighthouse could be psychologically challenging. Weeks of confinement, constant storms, no privacy, no escape, only the same faces every day. Some historians pointed out that Donald MacArthur reportedly had a fiery temperament. Could tensions have escalated into violence? Perhaps an argument turned physical. Perhaps someone died accidentally. Perhaps panic followed. Yet investigators found no evidence supporting such a scenario. No blood, no signs of struggle, no damaged furnishings suggesting a fight. Nothing indicated violence inside the lighthouse. And even if conflict had occurred, it still failed to explain how all three men vanished without leaving traces. The theory gradually lost support. Then came the stories that transformed the mystery into legend. The Flannan Isles had long possessed an eerie reputation. Local fishermen often avoided the islands after dark. Ancient folklore surrounded the rocky outcrops. Generations told stories of strange spirits, mysterious presences, and unseen forces inhabiting the remote landscape. Some islanders claimed the place felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, just unsettling, as though someone invisible was watching. In the years following the disappearance, rumors spread rapidly. People whispered that supernatural forces had taken the keepers. Others spoke of ghostly figures wandering among the cliffs. Some even claimed giant sea creatures lurked beneath the waves surrounding the islands. To modern listeners, these stories may sound absurd. But remember the context. 3 men had vanished completely. No bodies were ever recovered. No witnesses existed. No definitive explanation emerged. When facts disappear, legends thrive, and the Flannan Isles became fertile ground for legends. One of the most influential elements of the mystery involved the famous Lighthouse log entries. According to popular retellings, Thomas Marshall had recorded bizarre observations in the days before the disappearance. Stories claimed he described unprecedented storms. Reported that James Ducat appeared unusually quiet. Suggested Donald MacArthur had been crying. Most chillingly, some versions alleged that the men had been praying together while fear gripped the lighthouse. These details spread across newspapers, books, documentaries, and television programs. They became central to the mystery, Many people imagined 3 terrified men trapped inside a lighthouse while some unimaginable force approached from outside. It sounded like the beginning of a horror movie. There was only one problem. If the story might not be true. Years later, historians reviewing official records discovered something surprising. The famous logbook entries likely never existed. No verified copies were ever produced. No original records containing those dramatic descriptions were found. Many researchers now believe the entries were invented or exaggerated after the disappearance, possibly by journalists seeking a more sensational story. If that's true, one of the most famous pieces of evidence in the entire case may actually be a myth. And that realization changes everything. Without the mysterious log entries, investigators are left with far less information than most people realize. The truth is that we know remarkably little about the keeper's final days. The popular image of frightened men awaiting doom may simply be fiction, which makes the real mystery even more frustrating, because the closer researchers look, the less certainty they find. More than a century later, modern experts continue examining the case. Meteorologists have studied historical weather records. Maritime specialists have analyzed the island's geography. Historians have reviewed every surviving document. Many conclude that a powerful wave remains the most likely explanation. The western side of the island is exceptionally vulnerable to extreme seas. Under certain conditions, massive waves can reach astonishing heights. Some researchers believe one keeper went outside to inspect storm damage. A second followed to help. Then a third, seeing danger unfold, rushed outside in an attempt to assist. Moments later, all 3 were swept away. It is a plausible scenario. Perhaps even the most plausible. But plausible does not mean proven. No eyewitnesses exist. No bodies were recovered. No final message was left behind. And that means certainty remains impossible. The mystery survives because the final moments are missing. Imagine those last few minutes. The wind screaming across the cliffs. Rain lashing against stone. Dark clouds racing overhead. 3 men standing on one of the most isolated islands in the world. Then something happens. A decision. An emergency. A mistake. A force of nature. Whatever occurred next erased them from history. And the sea kept it secret. Years passed. Then decades. Generations came and went. The lighthouse eventually became automated. Technology replaced the lonely keepers who once maintained the beacon. Today, visitors occasionally travel to see the islands. The lighthouse still stands, silent, weathered, watching over the same ocean that swallowed the answers. Tourists walk the grounds. Photographers capture images of the cliffs. Researchers continue searching for clues. Yet, despite all the advances of modern science, the central question remains unchanged. What happened to James Ducat? What happened to Thomas Marshall? What happened to Donald MacArthur? The truth may have vanished with them. Perhaps the ocean claimed 3 hardworking men during a terrible storm. Perhaps the explanation is completely ordinary, me. Or perhaps something occurred that investigators have never imagined. That uncertainty is what keeps the story alive, not because we know what happened, but because we don't. The Flannan Isles Mystery endures as one of history's most haunting disappearances precisely because it offers no final chapter. No confession, no discovery, no resolution, only silence. The same silence that greeted Joseph Moore when he first stepped onto the island in December of 1900. A silence that seemed unnatural. A silence that felt wrong. A silence that remains more than 100 years later. And somewhere beyond those lonely cliffs beneath the cold waters of the Atlantic Ocean, the answer may still be waiting. Hidden forever in the darkness. Beyond reach, beyond explanation, beyond the light of the lighthouse itself. And that is why the mystery of the Flannan Isles continues to fascinate the world. Because some stories end with answers. But the most frightening mysteries